The sun was slipping low over the quiet town when the cowboy rode in, dust rising behind his horse with every slow step. He wasn't expecting trouble. He wasn't expecting anything at all. Just another small stop on a long road. But the moment he reached the center of town, he noticed something unusual. People watching him from their porches, whispering softly, like they were waiting for something to happen. He felt eyes on him, but he didn't pay them much mind. Not until he heard the sound of small footsteps rushing toward him. A little boy, no older than 8 or 9, came running out from between two buildings. His clothes were worn and his hair was messy, like he'd been running for a long time. But what struck the cowboy the most was the boy's face. His eyes were wide, filled with fear he was trying hard to hide. He stumbled to a stop right in front of the cowboy's horse, breathing fast, almost unable to speak. The cowboy pulled on the reins, bringing his horse to a gentle halt. He looked down at the boy, confused but alert. The boy opened his mouth, but his voice came out as a faint whisper at first. It took him a moment to gather the courage to speak louder. Then he looked up, straight into the cowboy's eyes, and said the words that made the entire world around them go still. "Sir, please take my mama." The cowboy blinked, unsure he heard right. People in town stopped what they were doing, watching the scene unfold. The boy tugged at the cowboy's boot, desperate now. His small hands trembled. There was something in his voice that wasn't just fear. It was a kind of hope too, the fragile kind that only appears when someone has run out of options. The cowboy slowly dismounted his horse, the saddle creaking softly. He crouched down so he was at the boy's level. He could feel the boy shaking. He noticed a dirt smear on his cheek, a tear trail hidden behind it. The boy tried to steady himself but failed. "Tell me what's wrong," the cowboy said in a calm voice. But the boy didn't answer. Instead, he simply pointed toward a worn-down house at the edge of town. His hand shook as he raised it, like he was scared someone might see him do it. The cowboy followed the direction of the boy's trembling finger, feeling something heavy settle in his chest as he realized this wasn't going to be a simple request. This was a cry for help, a desperate one. The cowboy didn't rush the boy. He could see how shaken he was, how every breath seemed to hurt his tiny chest. So he kept his voice low and steady, giving the child time to gather himself. But the boy didn't speak. He only kept pointing at the house in the distance, an old, tired-looking place with peeling paint and a crooked fence that leaned like it had given up long ago. The cowboy followed his gaze. There was no movement there, no smoke from a chimney, no sound of life at all. It felt like a place people tried not to notice. The boy tugged at the cowboy's sleeve, pulling gently as if afraid to push too hard. His eyes begged more than his words had, and that was enough to tell the cowboy he needed to move. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. The boy looked up, surprised that someone was treating him gently. That told the cowboy even more than the pointing finger did. "All right," the cowboy said quietly. "Lead the way." The boy stepped back and nodded. He didn't speak, but he started walking toward the house, his small steps uneven at first. He glanced over his shoulder every few feet to make sure the cowboy was still behind him. Every time he checked, the cowboy gave a slow, steady nod. The boy kept going. As they moved through town, people noticed. Eyes followed them from porches and shop windows. No one stepped in. No one said a word. Some turned away when the boy passed, pretending they hadn't seen him at all. That told the cowboy something was very wrong. In towns like this, folks usually helped their own. The silence meant they were afraid, or worse, they had learned to look the other way. The boy walked faster as they reached the end of the street. The houses thinned out, the road narrowing into a dirt path that led straight to the old, broken house. The cowboy watched the boy closely, noticing how his shoulders tightened the closer they got. His hands curled into small fists. His breathing grew shallow. He wasn't just scared. He was terrified. When they reached the gate, the boy hesitated. The wood was splintered and split down the middle. Someone had kicked it hard at some point. The boy's fingers brushed the top edge of it, and he froze for a moment, like memories were holding him still. The cowboy put a hand on the gate and pushed it open. It creaked loudly, a long, painful sound that echoed through the empty yard. The boy flinched. "Easy," the cowboy murmured. "I'm right behind you." They walked up the short path to the front porch. The boards groaned under their weight, and a few were so weak the cowboy had to tread carefully. The boy stepped over certain spots automatically, like he had learned long ago which boards would crack. That hit the cowboy harder than he expected. No child should have to know those things. The cowboy took a slow breath and let his hand rest near the holster on his belt, not grabbing it, just ready. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he could feel trouble sitting heavy in the air. The boy pushed the front door open without knocking. It wasn't locked. It didn't even have a proper handle anymore. Inside, the house was dim. The curtains were drawn tight, blocking out the afternoon light. Dust hung in the air, and the smell of something old and forgotten lingered in every corner. The boy stepped quietly, like he was afraid of waking someone. The cowboy followed him across the small entryway. His boots made a louder sound on the floor, and the boy flinched again. "Where's your mama?" the cowboy asked softly. The boy lifted a finger and pointed toward the back room. This time his hand didn't just shake, it trembled violently. The cowboy nodded and walked slowly toward the doorway. He pushed it with his fingertips, just enough to let it swing open. The dim light from the hallway spilled into the room. There, sitting on a low wooden chair beside a small table, was a woman. Her posture was rigid, like she had been sitting for hours without moving. Her hands were clasped together in her lap. Her thin hair hung loosely around her face. At first, she didn't look up. She seemed lost somewhere inside her own mind, as if she had learned to hide from the world even when it stood right in front of her. The boy ran to her and dropped to his knees beside the chair. He placed his small hand on hers and gave it a gentle shake, trying to pull her back. Slowly, she lifted her head. The cowboy felt his breath catch when he saw her face. She had bruises on both cheeks. Her lower lip was split and healing wrong. Dark marks covered her arms, some fresh, some old. She tried to hide them by pulling her sleeves down, but they rode back up again. She gave a faint smile when she saw her son, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were tired, tired in a way that spoke of years, not days. The boy looked from his mother to the cowboy, silently begging again. The mother followed her son's gaze. Her eyes landed on the cowboy, and something like fear flickered across her face, then something else. Something closer to hope, but buried so deep it barely showed. She tried to stand, but her legs wobbled. The boy held her hand tighter to steady her. She whispered something, too soft for the cowboy to hear. The cowboy stepped closer, careful not to move too fast, not wanting to startle her. He kept his voice calm, steady, like someone trying to soothe a wild horse. "Ma'am," he said gently, "your boy came to find me. He said you needed help." The mother lowered her eyes, ashamed not of herself, but of being seen like this. She didn't answer, she didn't nod, she didn't shake her head. She just stayed frozen, trapped between fear and hope. The boy looked up at her again and whispered, "Mama, please." And right then, the cowboy understood. They weren't just asking for help. They were asking for a way out. The mother sat there, trying to find the strength to lift her head fully. The cowboy didn't miss the way her fingers trembled in her lap. Even when the boy held her hand, she kept her shoulders tight, like she was bracing for something she expected to happen. Not something good, something painful, something she had grown used to. The cowboy stayed still near the doorway. He didn't want to tower over her or make her feel cornered. He had seen fear like this before, in people who had lived too long under someone else's control. He knew one wrong move could shut her down completely. So he waited. Silent, patient. The boy glanced back at the cowboy with those pleading eyes again, then turned to his mother. He lifted her hand and held it between both of his. "Mama," he whispered, "I told him. I told him everything." Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to speak but wasn't sure if she should. She looked at the cowboy again, studying his face. There was no judgment in his eyes, no anger at her, just a calm steadiness that felt unfamiliar to her. That was what made her look a little longer. The room was dim, But even in the shadows, the cowboy could see the purple marks on her arms clearly. Some looked days old. Others looked like they had been made just hours before. A fresh cut along her wrist was still red, not fully scabbed over. He felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his face gentle. If he showed anger now, even if it wasn't toward her, she might think it was. The boy let go of her hand and reached for her sleeve, pulling it up with the softest touch. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The bruises spoke louder than any child ever should. The mother tried to tug the sleeve back down, whispering, "Don't show him that." But the boy shook his head. "Mama, he needs to know." The mother's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked fast, trying to stop them. She wasn't crying because she hurt. She was crying because someone else was seeing the hurt. Someone who wasn't supposed to. The cowboy took one slow step into the room. She stiffened, fear jumping in her eyes, but he didn't move any closer. He just softened his voice even more. "You don't have to say anything," he told her. "I can see enough." The mother swallowed hard. Her throat bobbed as she forced air into her lungs. She didn't look at her arms anymore. She didn't look at the bruises. She looked only at her son. "He shouldn't have to see me like this," she whispered. "He shouldn't have to live like this," the cowboy replied, still keeping his voice low. Her lips trembled. For a moment she looked like she might break into sobs, but she held everything inside. It was clear she had gotten good at that, burying pain deep where no one could reach it. The boy leaned his head against her arm, as if trying to shield her from her own memories. The cowboy noticed how carefully he rested against her, like he was afraid of hurting her more. He probably knew exactly where her injuries were. He probably knew every bruise she tried to hide. The mother sighed shakily and reached up to touch the boy's hair. Her fingers were gentle, but even that simple gesture seemed to take effort. The cowboy crouched down slowly, making sure he moved where she could see him. He wasn't close enough to crowd her, but he was close enough that she could hear him clearly. "Your boy came running across town," he said. "He found me. That took courage." The boy straightened a little, not proudly, but as if relieved someone recognized what he had done. The mother closed her eyes for a moment, holding back tears. "He shouldn't have had to," she whispered. "He's just a child." The cowboy didn't argue. He didn't say it wasn't her fault. He didn't say she should have left sooner. He knew better than to throw those words around. He had seen what guilt looked like, and she was already drowning in it. Instead, he asked gently, "What happened to you?" The mother flinched, not from the question, but from the memories behind it. She looked toward the doorway as if expecting someone to appear there, someone she feared. The boy squeezed her hand and shook his head. "He's not here," the boy told her. "I checked. He's at the saloon. He won't come back yet." That was when the cowboy understood even more. The boy didn't just run for help. He had timed it. He had waited for the moment when the danger left the house. That meant he had probably seen what happened when the man was around. He had seen enough to know exactly when to run. The mother opened her eyes again and looked at the cowboy. Her voice was barely a breath. "He said he would take care of us. After my husband left, I didn't have much choice. I didn't have anyone." She looked down at her hands, twisting them slowly. "At first he was kind," she continued. "Or he pretended to be. Then he changed. Or maybe he was always like that and I just didn't see it." The cowboy didn't push her to go on, but she did anyway. "Sometimes suffering spills out when it feels even a little safe. When he got angry, he blamed me. When he drank, he blamed me. When he got tired, he blamed me." Her voice cracked. "Everything was always my fault." The boy shook his head quickly. "No, Mama, it wasn't." Her fingers brushed his cheek. "I didn't want him to see any of it. I tried to keep him away. I tried to make it quiet. But he saw." The boy nodded, tears building in his eyes. "I couldn't leave," she whispered. "He told me if I tried, he would find me. And he would take my son away." The cowboy's hands slowly closed into fists, but he kept his tone calm as ever. "Do you want to stay here?" he asked softly. The mother froze, completely still. Like even thinking about the answer was dangerous. The boy's voice broke through the silence. "Mama, please." She looked at him, then at the cowboy again. Her lips parted. A breath trembled out of her. She didn't answer, but her eyes did. The cowboy let the mother sit in silence for a moment, watching her eyes shift between him and the boy. She looked trapped, not by the walls around her, but by something inside, a fear that had lived with her for so long it felt like part of her bones. She took a shaky breath and tried to straighten up in her chair, but even that small motion made her wince. The boy instantly moved his hands to steady her arm. He wasn't just her child. He had become her protector in ways no child ever should. The cowboy could feel something knotting in his chest, but he kept his voice quiet and steady. Rushing her would only make her shrink back into fear. "You don't have to decide anything right now," he said softly. "Just talk to me. Tell me what you want." The mother's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she lowered her eyes, staring at the floor as if the wood planks might give her courage she didn't have on her own. The boy looked at her hopefully, his little fingers gripping the edge of her sleeve. The cowboy waited. Finally, the mother whispered, "I just wanted peace." Her voice cracked as she said it, like the word itself hurt. "After my husband left, I thought I could build a quiet life. Something safe, something small, but I had no work, no money, and people stopped knocking on the door when they realized I didn't have a man around." She swallowed hard. "The man at the saloon, he said he would help. He said we could stay with him until I got back on my feet." Her eyes darkened with shame. "I believed him." The boy shifted closer to her. She placed a weak hand on his back, barely able to keep it steady. "At first he was gentle," she continued. "He brought us food, fixed things around the house, told me I didn't need to worry." Her voice dropped even lower. He waited until I trusted him." The cowboy stayed silent. He could tell she needed to let the words out slowly, piece by piece, so they didn't crush her all at once. Then she said, barely above a whisper, "The first time he hit me, he apologized. He swore it would never happen again. He cried, and I believed him again." The boy's jaw tightened as he listened. He had heard all this before, but hearing it out loud made him tremble with anger and fear all over again. "He stopped apologizing after that," she said. "After a while, he didn't even try to hide it. If he drank, I stayed quiet. If he yelled, I stayed out of the way, but nothing was enough." Her hands twisted together in her lap. "He started telling me I couldn't leave, that no one would help me, that the sheriff wouldn't care." She looked up at the cowboy for the first time in several minutes, "And I believed that too." The cowboy shook his head gently. "You shouldn't have had to believe any of that." She looked away again, ashamed. "I didn't know what to do. If I ran, he said he'd take my boy. If I stayed, I could protect him at least a little." The boy suddenly spoke, his voice trembling. "Mama, I don't want you to protect me like that anymore. I don't want him to hurt you again." Her shoulders shook. Tears spilled from her eyes and she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. "I know, baby," she whispered. "I know." The cowboy could see the truth sitting heavy on her. She wanted to leave. She had wanted it for a long time. But wanting and doing were two very different things when fear controlled every step. The cowboy stayed crouched, careful not to crowd her. "Tell me," he said softly, "what's the thing you're most afraid of?" She hesitated, her breath uneven. Then her voice broke. "That he'll come back." The boy squeezed her arm. "He will, Mama, if we stay." The cowboy leaned in just a fraction, his voice solid but still gentle. "If he comes back while I'm here, he won't get near you." She closed her eyes, a shudder passing through her body. She believed him. Or maybe she wanted to believe him more than anything. But then she whispered something the cowboy wasn't expecting. "It's not just him I'm afraid of." The cowboy frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Her hands tightened in her lap. "People here, they know what he's like, they know what he does." She gestured faintly toward the town. "But no one helps. No one stands up to him. He has friends everywhere. They tell him things. They warn him." The boy nodded. "When Mama almost went to the sheriff, someone told him." The cowboy felt something cold crawl through his spine. This wasn't just fear of one man. This was fear of the whole system around him. The mother went on, her voice trembling, "If I leave, he'll come after us, and people will help him find us." The cowboy's jaw clenched, but he kept his tone the same calm, steady rumble. "Where I come from, ma'am, there are places he won't follow, and even if he tries, he won't get far." The mother looked at him fully now, really looked, searching his face for any sign of doubt, any sign he might be lying just to comfort her. She found none. For the first time since he entered the house, something shifted in her eyes. Not a smile, not confidence, but a tiny flicker of belief, like the very first spark struck in darkness. The boy saw it too. "Mama," he said softly, "we can go with him." She reached for her son's face, brushing a tear from his cheek. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't pull them away this time. "I just don't want to lose you," she whispered. "You won't," the boy said. "You'll save me." Her breath caught. Those words, coming from someone so small, hit her harder than any blow she had taken. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, then looked up at the cowboy again. Her lips parted, and slowly, painfully, she nodded. The moment the mother gave that tiny, trembling nod, something shifted in the air around them. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, almost too quiet. But the cowboy felt it like a weight lifting off the room. The boy let out a small breath, one he'd been holding for far too long, and he clung to his mother's hand as if he needed to be sure she wouldn't take the nod back. The cowboy rose slowly to his feet, careful not to move suddenly. He didn't want to scare her or break the fragile courage she had finally reached for. He stepped back just enough to give her space, just enough to show her she still had control over her own choices. "All right," he said softly. "Then we're going to get you both out of here." But the words barely left his mouth before the floorboards outside the room creaked, just once, but loud enough to freeze the mother in place. The boy's eyes widened. The cowboy turned his head slightly, listening. Another creak, a heavy footstep. Someone was inside the house. The mother's breath came out in a sharp, shaky gasp. She reached for her son, pulling him closer to her side. The boy's small hands fisted in her dress. They didn't need to see who it was. They already knew. The cowboy straightened, his eyes narrowing just slightly, though his face stayed calm. He knew fear when he saw it, real fear, and the way the mother trembled told him more than words ever could. A voice boomed from the hallway. "Why's the door open?" Rough, cold, slurred just enough to tell he'd been drinking. The cowboy positioned himself between the doorway and the mother, shifting just a little so he didn't block her view but shielded her at the same time. He didn't reach for his weapon. Not yet. Sometimes the threat of calm was more powerful than the threat of force. Heavy footsteps came closer. The shadow of a big frame filled the hall before the man appeared in the doorway. He stopped the moment he saw the cowboy, confusion hitting him first, then anger rising fast behind it. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" the man growled. The cowboy didn't answer right away. He just stood steady, shoulders relaxed, like he had all the time in the world. The man's eyes flicked toward the mother, who shrank back in her chair. The cowboy noticed, and so did the man. "Oh," the man sneered. "I see what's going on. She called you here, did she? Couldn't handle her chores, so she cried to some stranger." The mother shook her head quickly, panic flickering across her face. The boy pressed closer to her, and the man's eyes narrowed when he saw the boy cling like that. "Get away from her," he snapped at the child. "You're macking her weak." The cowboy stepped forward just once, blocking the man's view entirely. "She's not weak," the cowboy said quietly. "And the boy's not going anywhere." The man let out a harsh laugh. "You think you can walk in here and tell me how to run my home?" He took a step forward, puffing his chest. "Get out, now, before you get thrown out." The cowboy didn't blink. "This isn't your home," he said. "It's hers." That single sentence sliced through the room sharper than any blade. The man's face twisted, rage boiling up so fast he didn't even try to hide it. His fists curled at his sides. The mother shuddered, gripping the boy like she knew what was coming. The cowboy lifted one hand slightly, just enough to show he wasn't looking for a fight, but also wasn't afraid of one. "Don't do something you'll regret," he warned in a calm, steady voice. But the man didn't want warnings. He lunged forward, swinging a wild fist straight at the cowboy's head. It was fast, but the cowboy was faster. He shifted to the side and the punch cut through empty air, the man stumbling as he missed. The cowboy didn't hit him back. He just stepped between him and the mother again. "Stop," he said firmly. But the man swung again, this time lower, aiming for the cowboy's ribs. The cowboy caught the man's wrist midair, gripping it like iron. The man tried to jerk his arm free, but the cowboy didn't budge. "Let go," the man snarled. The cowboy didn't. He tightened his grip just enough to make the man wince. "I told you to stop," the cowboy said quietly, his voice low, steady, dangerous in the kind of way that made the mother stare with something close to awe. The man hissed through his teeth. "She's mine." "She was never yours," the cowboy replied. The man roared in anger and tried to swing with his other hand. But the cowboy stepped forward and shoved him back. Not hard, but with the force of someone who didn't need to try to be strong. The man stumbled into the hallway wall, letting out a grunt. The noise drew people. Footsteps echoed from outside. The cowboy didn't take his eyes off the man, but he could hear voices gathering near the front porch. Word spread quick in a small town, and the sound of a fight always stirred curiosity. The man growled and pushed off the wall, but before he could charge again, 2 townspeople appeared behind him, then a third. Then the sheriff stepped into view. The cowboy didn't move. The mother didn't move. The boy clung to her, breath shaking. The sheriff eyed the man, then the cowboy, then the trembling woman behind him. His jaw tightened. "That's enough," the sheriff said. The man tried to speak, pointing wildly at the cowboy. "He's trespassing," but the sheriff cut him off. "I've heard enough about what you've been doing here." He stepped forward, grabbing the man's arm. "You're common with me." The man fought it, cursing, but townspeople joined in, helping the sheriff restrain him. The mother shook as she watched, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The boy buried his face in her side. The cowboy stayed where he was, watching quietly as the man was dragged out the door, shouting threats that suddenly sounded small. Very small. For the first time since the cowboy walked into that house, the air inside felt lighter. The danger hadn't vanished, not completely, but something had broken, something that had held the mother trapped for far too long. She wasn't free yet, but for the first time, she wasn't alone. The shouting faded down the hallway as the sheriff and the townspeople dragged the man outside, his boots scraping along the wooden floor. The front door slammed shut behind them, and for a moment the whole house fell silent, so quiet that the mother's ragged breathing filled the space. She clutched her son, her hands trembling uncontrollably, the adrenaline still running wild beneath her bruised skin. The boy looked up at the cowboy with wide, frightened eyes. "Is he really gone?" he whispered. "For now," the cowboy said gently, "and he's not coming back today." The mother exhaled shakily, but it wasn't relief yet, it was disbelief. She had lived too long in fear to trust anything so quickly. She kept glancing toward the door as if expecting the man to burst through despite being hauled away by half the town. Her shoulders remained tight, her body still folded in on itself like a wounded bird. The cowboy stayed a few paces away, giving her space to breathe, space to think, space to be something she hadn't been allowed to be for a long time, herself. He didn't crowd her, didn't push her, didn't speak loudly. Some things needed quiet more than comfort. The boy slowly moved from her side and stepped toward the cowboy, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. That small gesture, simple, shaky, told the cowboy how long this child had been forced to be strong. "Too long? What do we do now?" the boy asked. The cowboy lowered himself to one knee so he wasn't towering over him. "Now," he said softly, "we get your mama out of here, somewhere safe. Somewhere she won't be looking over her shoulder every minute." The boy nodded eagerly, like he had been holding onto that hope for years. But when he turned back to his mother, reality hit him again. She still sat frozen, hands clenched, gaze locked on the floor. She looked like she didn't know how to stand, like the idea of moving felt impossible after everything she'd been through. The cowboy walked toward her slowly, each step measured. When he finally reached her, he crouched down and spoke in a voice that was almost a whisper. "Ma'am," he said gently, "you don't have to stay here anymore." Her eyes filled with tears again, silent, streaming tears that fell without sound. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She opened her mouth once, twice, then closed it and shook her head, trembling. The cowboy didn't interrupt her. He waited. Sometimes silence was the only way someone could gather the courage to speak. Finally, she whispered, "I've never left before, not really." The cowboy nodded, understanding. First step's always the hardest. She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw a hint of the woman she must have been years ago, gentle, hopeful, kind-hearted. That version of her had been buried under fear and pain for too long, but a small piece of her still lingered. The boy took her hand again. "Mama, come with us." "Please?" Her fingers curled around his so lightly it was almost nothing, but it was movement. It was willingness. It was a beginning. The cowboy offered his hand, not grabbing, not pulling, just offering. She stared at it for a few long seconds, her breath trembling unevenly. Then she placed her hand in his. It was a fragile gesture, but it was enough. He helped her stand slowly, carefully. Her legs were weak, and she stumbled once, but the boy rushed to her other side, supporting her with all the strength his small body had. She looked between the two of them, her son and a stranger who had stepped into their lives at the smallest cry for help, and something inside her shifted. She wasn't alone anymore. The cowboy guided her through the house. Every crack in the floor, every closed door, every shadow made her flinch. The boy noticed and squeezed her hand each time, whispering, "It's okay, Mama. It's okay." When they stepped outside, the sunlight hit her face, and she blinked rapidly, as if she hadn't felt daylight on her skin in a long time. She looked around nervously at the people standing in small groups across the street. Some watched silently. Some whispered among themselves. For years they had seen her pain and said nothing. But now, today, they weren't stopping her from leaving. The cowboy led her to his horse, but she hesitated, staring at it like she wasn't sure she deserved a way out. The boy didn't wait. He climbed up onto the wagon attached to the back with quick, practiced motions. He reached down for her hand, eyes full of hope and fear and love all mixed together. "Mama," he said softly, "come on." Her breath shivered in her chest. She looked at the horse, then at her son, then at the cowboy. Her knees trembled, but she stepped forward. The cowboy helped her up gently, his hand steady and sure, and the boy pulled her close once she was seated beside him. She let out another breath, this one deeper, fuller. The cowboy saw the way her shoulders eased, just slightly, like her body finally understood she was leaving the place that had hurt her. He climbed onto the front of the wagon, took the reins in his hands and glanced back at her. She didn't say anything, but she nodded once, a small gesture of trust. The horse stepped forward. The wheels of the wagon rolled over the dirt path, creaking softly. The boy leaned against his mother, and she wrapped her arm around him, clinging to him like he was the last piece of the world she believed in. The town grew smaller behind them. The broken house, the shadows, the fear, they all faded slowly with each turn of the wheels. The mother looked out over the open land ahead of them. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange and gold. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about what might happen when he came home. She wasn't bracing herself for footsteps in the hallway. She wasn't shrinking into a corner to stay small and safe. She was leaving. She closed her eyes and felt the wind brush against her bruised skin. It didn't hurt. It felt clean, light, like something new. The cowboy didn't speak. Neither did the boy. None of them needed words. The silence between them wasn't fear anymore. It was hope taking its first quiet breath.